So now that I've gotten the first few quarterbacks scouted and evaluated and graded for the 2017 NFL Draft, I'm moving on to the next position, and that will be running backs. Just so that way you guys are in the know. I will have 5 running backs graded here very shortly. The videos will be up, then I'll move on to wide receivers and then tight ends and then offensive line. The plan being is to do a few of the biggest name prospects at each position offense and then moving on to defense and then come back and do the next 5 or 7 or whatever at each position. I just feel like that's an efficient way to kind of move through things, because otherwise if I just did all the quarterbacks at once, I could spend a couple of weeks doing the quarterbacks and I always feel like I get behind the 8 ball and I'm late to catch up on things. Nonetheless, now I'm going to start grading running backs, and this video is a quick explanation of how I will be grading the running backs for the 2017 NFL Draft. Now, I always start off with quarterbacks when it comes to grading, but in terms of running backs, it's one of my favorite positions to grade. It's one of my favorite positions to evaluate. As you can imagine, as a Bears fan, that organization hasn't done a lot right over the years, but when it comes to running backs and middle linebackers, I've been very fortunate to see some of the great players that I've been able to see man that position for the Monsters of the Midway, who are not so monstrous anymore. But when you look at the running back position, there are different types of running backs. You have those do-it-all 3-down back guys that can hurt you running the football, catching the football. You have those guys that fit more into the first and second down power backs between the tackles runners that you're going to yank out in third down in passing situations. Those first and second down backs also tend to be guys that you bring in goal line situations. Then you have those third down receiving back types, the kind of scat backs, if you will, the change of pace type of guys. And they're all important. And they can all have significance and impact on an NFL team. And sometimes I think it's important when it comes to the running back position to point out that generally the 3-down backs will tend to get graded higher. But for certain teams in certain situations, I could justify taking a first, second down back type of guy or a third down receiving back type of guy over somebody who you're trying to get as a 3-down back, because maybe they already have a really good scat back and they need somebody that's powerful between the tackles to carry the primary burden. Or they've already got the primary back, but they're not much of a threat as a receiver. You need that guy that can do some of the things in the passing game that you need out of the backfield. Maybe he brings something to the return game as well. So it's important to point that out. In terms of the grades, I'm doing it on the scale similar to quarterbacks, where it's 10 different categories, 0 to 10 points for each. Those categories are size, quickness/speed, the ability to break/avoid tackles, vision/patience, cutting ability, ball security, receiving skills, pass protection, durability, and intangibles. Those are the 10 categories. Now again, just like I mentioned with the quarterbacks, the grading that I'm doing is not entirely complete, because in part I'm trying to do it generally across the board based off of talent, and it's not necessarily tailored to a specific team. Whereas if you're a specific team, for an example, you might prefer a Leonard Fournette type of running back, or a Dalvin Cook type of running back, or an Alvin Kamara, or a Christian McCaffrey. You could prioritize that position more than other organizations who did not prioritize that position much at all. So my grading in general, just because, let's say, if I have a running back that's graded in the 4th round, that doesn't mean I necessarily would have a problem with a certain team taking them in the 2nd round. Flip side, if a running back gets taken in the 2nd round and I just don't think the talent justifies it, and frankly doesn't fit what the team does, then I don't care if the guy took him in the team took him in the 4th round. It still doesn't make sense. In terms of those individual categories, though, the one that I honestly care about the least, and I know NFL coaches and teams care about this a lot, and I think it's ridiculous, is pass protection. I'm not saying that it doesn't carry any type of importance whatsoever. But at the end of the day, if you're drafting a Leonard Fournette or Dalvin Cook, an Alvin Kamara, a Christian McCaffrey, any number of other running backs, and you're drafting them high in the first 2 to 3 rounds, it's nice if they can pick up blitzes. It's nice if they can stay in and help protect the passer, keep the integrity of the pocket every once in a while. But if they don't, who gives a shit? Because if you're drafting running backs high and that's a primary decision-making process for you is whether or not the guy can block, then you're not doing it right, period. You're drafting running backs that could be game changers as rushers or game changers as receivers, game changers all across the board. Gives a shit if they can block or not. It's just another nice thing that they could do to be a more complete back. But I'll be honest with you, that's probably the thing that I grade the least harshly. And I'm a pretty harsh grader. And you're going to see that in my grading scale. Even the running backs that I put first round grades are, they're not going to be first round grades by that much because they still have issues, in my opinion. They still have flaws. I see too often where I see in drafts like this player out of 100, somebody will give them like a 97 or a 98. I mean, that's indicating that that prospect is almost perfect. And that should be reserved for the truly special and elite, once a decade type of talents at the position, or once a decade type of talents, period. But yet I'll see it consistently each and every single year that you'll have a guy gets a 98, and a 97 and a half, 97, 97 and a half, 96. No, that's not how it works. At least in my mind, anyways, my opinion. But, you look at size too. Size could be any number of things. As a Bears fan, Walter Payton to me is the best all-around running back of all time. It's not really that close. And he was all of maybe 5'10", 205 pounds. But he could break defenders' ankles, and he could plow over anybody. So did it matter that he wasn't 6 foot, 225, 230 pounds? Absolutely not. Walter Payton could still dominate today's game every bit like he did the game 25, 30 years ago. Or 30 years ago, 35, 40 years ago. He absolutely could. So while it's nice, again, with size, I put it down there as a part of the grading scale because it is a factor. It shouldn't be the be-all, end-all. When I look at the running back position, having a guy that's explosive with quickness and speed, I think is nice, and it's somewhat important. It's, again, not the be-all, end-all. You want guys, though, that could break and avoid tackles. I think that's even more important, whether that being that they could shake guys in the open field, whether they have tremendous cutting ability, which, again, I think is very important. Even if you're a bigger power back, you have to be able to set up the blockers, be able to read and recognize the hole, and be able to cut to it, because not everything's going to be straight line, just run into the back of the offensive line and hope something breaks. You want guys that can break and avoid tackles. You want guys that could fight through the first contact and pick up a couple of yards. The guys that could break arm tackles. The guys that command the defense, potentially put 8 men in the box because they can't stop them otherwise. That to me is a very important trait, as is vision and pace. It's important for a running back, most running backs, to be able to allow their offensive line time to actually set up their blocks. Set up the lanes. Because a lot of times initially, it's not there. You got to wait. You got to allow the blocks to materialize, the blocks to set up, the angles to be made, the alleys to be created. Now, granted, not everybody needs to be tiptoeing behind the offensive line for 3 seconds like Le'Veon Bell. That's a special type of circumstance. But you want a guy that can sit there and be patient enough to slow down and be able to recognize the hole. And more importantly, recognize potentially where the hole is coming that is not there yet. Like I look at Ezekiel Elliott's rookie season in 2016. His first game against the Giants, he just got the ball and he wanted to do so much. He just plowed right into the back of the offensive line. And really, that's basically what happened. But as the season progressed and went along, he slowed down a little bit. He waited for things to happen and allowed his great vision to kick in. And when he slowed down, he actually sped up. And he was able to break off big gaping runs every single week behind that great Dallas run-blocking offensive line unit. So vision and patience, to me, incredibly important. Some running backs are going to be better in terms of cutting than others, but it's nice to have a guy. You don't have to be the Barry Sanders stop on a dime, break everybody's freaking ankles, break their tackle 3 separate times type of guy. But it's nice for a guy that could be able to get defenses off balance by being able to cut. But I think ball security is much more important. You've got to be able to hold on to the football. Now, some guys, because of their abilities and the big plays they make, every once in a while they may put the ball on the ground, and you may have to live with that, and that will just be a flaw. But it is a quick way, especially as a young running back, to get into coach's doghouse very quickly. It really negatively impact your career going forward. You want a running back that you can trust. You can trust in the red zone to not put the ball on the ground. With 4 minutes to go in the game when you're trying to milk the clock, he's not going to put the ball on the ground. Those fumbles, those turnovers could be big momentum changers in games. You don't want running backs that put the ball on the ground, especially if they don't have the ability to create their own big-time momentum-changing plays positively in terms of explosive plays as a runner or as a receiver. I think receiving skills are even more important in today's NFL, but some running backs may not have it, but they could be so good on first and second down, it doesn't matter quite as much. Just when you look at this running back class, you're going to have guys that fit into all three categories. And I just emphasize again, I'm trying to grade in general, not with any specific team system in place. This is not about needs, nothing like that. But it's going to be a lot of the eye of the beholder in terms of who you think will work out best based off of the situation they end up in. And just like with a lot of other positions, running back is as much as anything about the position they end up in. I look at Ezekiel Elliott again, phenomenal rookie year. For my money, was the MVP of the league. But you look at Jordan Howard and what he did for the Chicago Bears. His supporting cast was terrible by comparison. And he was a monster. Imagine what he could have potentially done in Dallas behind that offensive line unit and with that talent and that help around him. Holy God. So might not have been quite to Ezekiel Elliott's level, but it wouldn't have been that far off. This is a good running back class. A very, very good running back class. And there are many guys that I feel can be big-time impact players and contributors at the NFL level, even if they aren't taken in the first round. But with that said, there are a couple of these running backs that should end up being taken in the first round. Just because you can find talented players at the running back position in rounds 3 through 7 doesn't mean that if their grade justifies it, you shouldn't take them in round 1. Let the talent, let the board, you stay true to your board. Because if we want to use that argument, really outside of the quarterback position, most every other position in the league, wide receiver, Antonio Brown was a 6th-round pick in, 2010? He's arguably the best in the league. And I think of other guys, like Demaryius Thomas was a 4th-round pick. Julian Edelman was a 7th-round pick. Doug Baldwin was undrafted. I'm naming some slot guys, but I think you get the point. If that was the case, we could sit there and say, well, none of these positions have to be drafted in the first round because you can find talent at those positions all throughout the draft, and that's entirely true, sometimes even as undrafted free agents. But a good running back class, the first 5 running backs I will be grading will be Leonard Fournette, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, and Deontay Foreman. And then in a few weeks, when I come back to the running backs again, I'll hit kind of the second wave. If you have any questions about how I'm grading them, or what my thought process is as I go into evaluating these prospects, feel free to hit me up on Twitter at the Jeff Schlegel is the Twitter handle, or hit me up in the comments section. Otherwise, stay tuned. Scouting reports of running backs coming soon.